Welcome back, Focus Learners. We are jumping right into today's explainer, and we've got something truly special lined up for you. We're exploring Khushwant Singh's The Portrait of a Lady. Now, this is just a beautifully written intergenerational short story. It paints this incredibly vivid, deeply personal picture of the author's relationship with his grandmother. And as we'll see, by taking us through the structured phases of their life together, Singh really captures those subtle yet profound ways that our relationships evolve as times change. It's an absolute masterclass in character study, so let's just get right into it.
Right off the bat, I want you to listen to this phrase: an expanse of pure white serenity, breathing peace and contentment. It's gorgeous, right? Singh uses this really striking imagery to describe his grandmother, basically comparing her to a quiet winter landscape up in the mountains. And this single sentence actually acts as the anchor motif for her entire character. Because throughout this shifting narrative, as locations change, and as the author himself grows up from a little boy to a university grad, her core essence, that pure white serenity, remains remarkably unchanging. So let's see how the author establishes this in Chapter 1, A Portrait of Serenity. To really understand their dynamic, we first need to get a feel for her physical presence and, of course, her deep, unshakable sense of tradition. The author actually tells us that the very thought of his grandmother ever being young and pretty was almost revolting to him. To him, it sounded like one of the fables or myths she used to tell. She had just always been short, fat, and slightly bent. Her face was this crisscross of wrinkles running from everywhere to everywhere. She'd hobble about the house in spotless white clothing, keeping one hand resting on her waist just to balance her stoop. So the crucial takeaway here is that to Singh, she literally hadn't aged a single day in 20 years. She was, in her own unique way, beautifully and permanently old. Moving right along to Chapter 2, The Village Years. This is a phase of their lives that's just steeped in warm nostalgia. While his parents were off settling in the city, the author and his grandmother shared this highly disciplined morning routine that bound them incredibly closely together in the village. She'd wake him up every single morning, singing her prayers in this monotonous sing-song voice while she bathed him. She was really hoping he'd learn it by heart by just listening to it. Then she'd fetch his wooden slate, which she'd already washed and plastered with yellow chalk, tie his tiny earthen ink pot and red pen into a little bundle, and hand the whole shebang over to him. After a quick breakfast of a thick, stale chapati with a little butter and sugar, they'd walk to the temple school together. Her entire life really revolved around taking care of him and her unwavering faith. Now, the walk home is where we get this incredible sensory detail. She always carried several extra stale chapatis with her, specifically for the village dogs. As soon as they left the temple doors, these dogs would follow them all the way home, growling and fighting with each other for the scraps of bread. It's such a wonderful contrast, isn't it? You have this figure of pure white serenity, quietly praying, but she's actively engaging with the loud, vibrant, almost chaotic outdoor life of the village. It really shows us she wasn't just a quiet figure stuck indoors, she was completely connected to the living, breathing world around her. But, routines rarely last forever, which brings us to Chapter 3, The City Turning Point. So things change when they are called to live in the city, and a physical and emotional wedge is steadily driven between them. Notice the shifting meaning of the word tell in the text here. It's fascinating. Back in the village, her fingers were constantly busy telling the beads of her rosary, which means counting them while reciting prayers. But in the city, the author would tell her English words and little facts about Western science, meaning to make known or communicate. This brilliant little shift in language illustrates the exact nature of their growing disconnect. The daily focus of their lives, their very vocabularies, were moving in completely opposite directions. Okay, let's dive into this contrast to really understand the wedge that was forming between them. In the village, education was totally intertwined with religion. The school was literally attached to the temple. The priest taught the alphabet, and the grandmother sat right inside reading scriptures. But in the city, it's a whole different ballgame. The author goes to an English school and he takes a motor bus. No more walking together. He's learning the law of gravity, Archimedes' principle, and that the world is round. So not only have they lost their shared physical journey to school, but very quickly they stop sharing an intellectual journey too. The grandmother literally couldn't help him with his new lessons anymore. And honestly, she was deeply distressed by it. Specifically, 3 things really bothered her: the total lack of teaching about God, the lack of scriptures, and, perhaps most severely, the introduction of music lessons. To her highly traditional mindset, music had these very lewd associations. She firmly believed it was the monopoly of harlots and beggars, absolutely unfit for gentlefolk. She didn't say much about it out loud, but her silence meant profound disapproval. In fact, she rarely talked to him after that. Time marches on, bringing us to Chapter 4, the final homecoming. Eventually, the author goes up to university. He gets his own room, which essentially snaps the final common link of their friendship. After that, he goes abroad for 5 years, and during those lonely years, she just accepts her seclusion with quiet resignation. She spends her days spinning her wheel and reciting her prayers. Her only real joy, literally described as her happiest half hour of the day, was sitting in the veranda breaking bread into little bits for hundreds of birds. The text calls it a veritable bedlam of chirrupings. Some would perch on her legs, others on her shoulders, but she never shooed them away. With her grandson gone, these noisy sparrows basically became her closest companions. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the dramatic change that comes over her when he finally returns from his studies. Normally, her lips are just moving in silent prayer, right? Her fingers telling her rosary beads. But on the evening of his homecoming, for the very first time, she did not pray. Instead, she collected the neighborhood women, got her hands on an old drum, and just started to sing. For hours, she thumped the sagging skins of this dilapidated drum, singing songs about the homecoming of warriors. The family literally had to persuade her to stop so she wouldn't overstrain herself. It's just this sudden, beautiful burst of loud, joyous celebration from a woman who had been completely defined by her quietness. Sadly, that overexertion takes a heavy toll. This brings us to our final chapter, a silent goodbye. The very next morning, she fell ill with a mild fever. The doctor said it would pass, but the grandmother, she knew differently. She calmly declared that her end was near, and because she had omitted to pray in those final hours of her life the evening before, she stubbornly refused to waste even one more minute talking to her family. Totally ignoring their protests, she lay peacefully in bed, praying and telling her beads one last time. Before the family even suspected what was happening, her lips stopped moving. The rosary fell from her lifeless fingers, and a peaceful pallor spread over her face. Her pure white serenity had taken its final, permanent form. As the family was making arrangements for the funeral, the sun was setting, bathing her room and the veranda in this blaze of golden light. And it's here that Singh provides an image that is just impossible to forget. Surrounding her body, right up to where she lay dead and stiff, wrapped in a red shroud, sat thousands of sparrows, scattered all over the floor. But this time, there was no chirruping, none at all. Think about that eerie, profound contrast between the noisy bedlam of her happiest half hours and this absolute mournful silence from thousands of birds. Feeling sorry for the birds, the author's mother fetched some bread, broke it into little crumbs, and threw it to them, exactly the way the grandmother used to do. But the sparrows took absolutely no notice of the bread. They weren't there for food. When the family finally carried the grandmother's corpse away, the birds simply flew off quietly. The sweeper just swept those untouched breadcrumbs into the dustbin the next morning. It is such a touching, stunning final detail, showing us that even the natural world recognized her passing and grieved the loss of her gentle spirit. Which brings us to the end of our explainer today. The source text actually leaves us with an exercise, a question that I want to turn over directly to you. Have you known someone like the author's grandmother? Do you feel that same sense of loss with regard to someone you've loved and lost? Khushwant Singh's masterful portrait really asks us to examine those shifting, sometimes difficult, but ultimately unbreakable bonds across generations. So, take a moment to reflect on your own life. How do the silent, steadfast presences in your world shape who you are today? Think about that, and as always, keep learning.